Welcome so much. We have the winning team of the first ever world building existential hope course that we ran at Foresight Institute. I'm very happy to have you guys here. We were so impressed by the world that you presented, and we're so excited to get to talk to you about it now. Let's maybe start with you guys introducing yourselves. Who are you, and why did you want to join this program?
So I am Antoine, and basically, I'm the CEO of Centola, which is a consulting firm that do economic forecasting for companies and government. And I've been working in economic forecast for my whole career. So I was really interested in exploring a new way to thinking about the future. And actually, very different from foresight, and world building is very different for forecasting because you don't look into data, you don't think like in a probabilistic manner, you just try to imagine what could happen. And I find it really interesting. So thank you so much for organizing this.
Thank you. Sophie?
Hi, my name is Sophia. My background is in computer science. I'm a software engineer. I used to work in the games industry and in a bunch of different startups. And right now I'm working at the intersection of AI and digital democracy, coordination, deliberation, and metacognitive tools and tools for that. I got into world building because I think I'm always very inspired by narratives in general. I'm a very narrative-driven person. And for some time I found myself like thinking about positive scenarios, not just like for my own life, which I always do, but also for the world. And a friend of mine pointed out that I might like world building. And yeah, I've been excited to see world building become like a topic first with the FLI world building competition and now with this. And yeah, I was really excited to join the course, and it's been a really great experience. So thank you for organizing it.
Thank you. And Kinsa?
Yeah, nice to be here and talk a bit more about our world. My background is in bioengineering, so that's what I'm trained in, lab automation and synthetic biology, and currently more in the infectious disease, therapeutics and vaccine world. My day-to-day exists of thinking of the biosecurity risks of novel pathogens emerging. And so I'm working at a nonprofit called Panoplia Laboratories right now, where we're developing novel antivirals. Yeah, so it made me curious about world building in particular, and is the existential hope aspect of it. So I often think of the risks of new biotechnologies, and it was just a really nice change to try and imagine a world with all these like new possibilities and imagine like a hopeful bio future. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a real interesting what if question to ask yourself. Like what if a positive future with all these technologies. So you guys created the Orari world. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And yeah, could you just please give us a brief overview of this world? How would you describe it if you only had 3 minutes to do?
Yeah, it's not going to be easy to summarize everything in 3 minutes, but I'll try it. Maybe I'll try to give you the main ideas that we wanted to put into our world. The first one, I think, is that we wanted to play with the idea of what would happen if someone would be able to build an AI that would be great, like really great at forecasting the future. So making the world more predictable and also giving the abilities to better anticipate the future outcome of many decisions, what would happen in such a world. So this was the key idea. We talked about the company that did this AI. And then a second idea is that luckily, these companies, those people, they were really well-intentioned, because obviously what you could do with such an AI is just to gain power, gain a lot of money on financial market, etc. But those companies, luckily, because it's an existential hope work, was well-intentioned and wanted this technology to be beneficial for the whole humanity. And they were inspired by the concept of futurarchy. So futurarchy, for the people that may not know what it is a concept that was introduced by Robin Hanson. And this is basically the idea that today we have a lot of policies in all countries that are suboptimal and that lead to suboptimal outcomes. And this is due to the fact that we cannot aggregate the information and the preference of people to find the best policies. So democracy, they fail to aggregate this information, but prediction markets are very reliable at aggregating information and predicting outcomes. So this idea that we could use prediction market in governance and just basically take a better decision. So they use this idea And I think maybe we'll go a bit deeper in how it's going to work. But basically, they created a decentralized organization where everyone can be involved. All the forecasts from Orare are going to be public, so anyone can use it. And so this is, I think, the second idea. The third idea is that we thought that it would make sense that such a project would have much more traction in the developing world than in the developed world. And there are many reasons for that. The first one is that everyone has the same financial incentive in this project. We'll talk about how it's work, but you have the same incentive for all humans. And so, of course, poorer people are more incentivized than richer people. And the second idea is that I think the futurarchy hypothesis about bad policies is really relevant in the developing world when you have a huge information gap between what are the policies that you should implement and what is currently implemented. So it really makes sense to think that it's going to work really well in the developing world. So in the scenario that we wrote, taking off first in Kenya, so in Eastern Africa, and then in Western Africa after that, and then it's spreading. And so basically, by the end of the timeline, everyone is adopting this with a lag for certain countries. And we'll talk about this out, but at the end, everything is better off. We use some metrics like GDP is better, health metrics are better. So thanks to the system and its adoption, everything is better at the end.
Yeah, that's great that everything is better. It would be interesting to hear if there's any more like reasoning behind why you consider this an existential hope vision, because that was part of the prompt. Like, what makes this future a desirable outcome for humanity?
I think I was going to answer that. So I think because we took a creative aspect to this and thought first of developing worlds and how that would change things there, I think priorities are different on what technologies or desires the community has there. And I think that is quite hopeful, is that we have basically the voices of anyone, of the normal people being heard. And I think it is going to make a huge change, or in the world at least that we imagine, particularly in health and sustainability. People want to improve their daily lives, meaning they want better food, they want better access to health, they want more sustainable cities and more affordable lifestyles. And a lot of that comes down to often ownership of countries over certain technologies. And in biotechnology particularly, I think this is really big on the health side of things. So if those countries can now have ownership over supply chains for developing novel vaccines or medical countermeasures, that can be huge for them. And so less reliant on donations and things like that. Yeah, and then I think there could be interesting changes also in like agriculture, sustainability. And so the cities that we came up with that sprout from there are just wonderful places to live, where there's like a lower risk to getting sick, and like normal standard healthcare is more accessible. Yeah, so I think that's one of the basic, it's a pretty basic hope, right, to have, but it's still quite inaccessible for the majority of the world.
Yeah, but that's, I guess, what's so great, that it is very accessible to the majority of the world in vision. Great. One of the things that we asked of you guys when we asked you to create this world was to think about what the like top 3 goals would be to achieve by 2045. And so I was wondering if you could just like mention which top goals you landed on, and then how you've like why you landed on those goals, like why, how do they reflect the values and like the priorities of the society of this world?
Yeah, our 3 aspirational goals were focused on democracy, health equity, and economic equity. And health equity is being accomplished through bioengineering, and then like radical advancements in democracy are being achieved by this system Orare, which is like this predictive direct democratic system. And that also has a huge impact on the economic equity, like we mentioned. And the values and priorities, I think, that are reflected are, thought about this, I think that there's like a pretty strong focus on pluralism, because we want all kinds of people to be represented in decision making, and also for all people to be able to live the kind of life that they want to be living. And civic duty is maybe like a new value that becomes stronger in our vision. because participating in political decision making through the system becomes like a pretty high, like an important activity for pretty much all people who are living in these countries. And I guess as well, like equality and equity in general. We wanted to lift up these countries that have been like maybe stagnating economically for a long time, or have fallen behind because of colonization, for example.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I guess that, yeah, we can never forget like the flip side of the positive, which is like, what were the challenges or main obstacles that you guys really thought you would have to find a strategy to overcome to be able to achieve these goals?
Yeah, so there are, I think, many challenges regarding the level of ambition in the goal, but the first one I think is the current state of a democratic backsliding. I think we need to be a bit careful because, yes, democratic principles are making progress in many parts of the world, but we can also not ignore that today we have lots of populism, lots of distrust in institutions, a lot of distrust in media, in politics, and also in science, as we have seen. So I think the recent developments are not in the direction that we wanted them to be in the Orare system. So I think that's very difficult to tell. So this would be the main challenge. A second challenge that it's related, we don't want either to have the opposite movement being some kind of technocratic authoritarian system. And I think it's very difficult to think about futarchy without getting a bit closer to an authoritarian regime. In the original proposition by Robin Hanson, you have some kind of rule-based governing where the prediction market, they can veto the parliament. I think it's a bit difficult to get behind this side in the current days. So what we wanted to do in our world was something a bit smoother when the system actually don't take any decision, but it can influence the decision because everyone trusts the system. That's another way to put it. And a third, I think, class of challenging are all the technical challenges behind what we talked about. And there are many. So you have challenges accomplishing what we said about bioengineering and about, of course, the AI itself. Is it possible to have an AI that is as good as we told in the world we mentioned? We don't know yet. I'm quite optimistic about this because with modern LLMs, there are many tasks that were really far ahead for AIs and that are now considered as being within reach for AIs. And forecasting the future, we actually have some good results in the past month. I think I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 or 10 years, we have maybe not something as world-changing as Orare, but really some really good AI system that can anticipate future events and that are reliably used by many organizations.
That's really interesting. And in this world, what do you think is like the most different about the world that we're living in today? And what do you also think is the same, if anything?
The places that have seen the most change in our world are the countries that have adopted, or like the both of countries in Africa where first adopters, and they have seen just really fast economic growth, lots of improvements in coordination in general, a lot of improvement in political decision making. The quality of life in these countries have like really skyrocketed. I think something that is the same is like there's democracy is like a system that you can never probably perfect it. There is still going to be, especially in countries where Orare is being adopted a little later, there's this finding, okay, this is solving a lot of problems, but we can still keep working on this. And what I see really hopeful about this future is that people have more ownership. They feel like they have control over decisions that are affecting them. They have a lot more say in political decision making, especially on a local level and then on a national level and further. So I think that's a pretty big difference. And I think contributing a lot to like the crisis in trust that we have right now, because people feel like they don't have control. So system with direct democracy helps in that a lot. And because of the prediction market that's included in the system, I would like to think that it's like changing, how do you say, changing the relationship to policy to be more evidence-based. So when you have more data and something that you can fall back on and just, okay, this is how we predict that these policies will affect the world, then it becomes less about, I would like to think that politics becomes less tribal and just more grounded on truth.
Yeah, so maybe good to emphasize also that the thing that stays the same, it's that it's somewhat a partial system or a hybrid system on the political level, right? There's still like a traditional political system in place often. So this Orare is not fully replacing the common politics, but more like helping it put in the right way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting like addition. I think what made your world very interesting in that it feels like it is grounded in the like today world, but also still like a very positive and different vision. Another thing that we had asked you to contribute with in your world build was like write out a little short story where you talk about what does a day in the life for someone in this world look like. Could you tell us a little bit about your story? Like, why did you choose this person and this day in their life?
Sure. I guess I wrote most of this piece with the help of ChatGPT, of course. I guess my prompt was like, I wanted to start from like my normal day and how, because I didn't want it to be like too futuristic. It should be normal. Okay, someone's in their apartment. They look out of the window. What does their landscape look like? I think there's a lot that tells. Or what does their apartment look like? Or who else is with them there? Who are they speaking to? And I think starting from that was easy. So I was imagining, okay, this woman lives in a high-rise apartment, looks out and outside and describing the landscape of that city, and imagining, okay, there's like an AI assistant also that they can talk to. But in this story, we just dropped it in one line where she asks the assistant like to check in with her son who is like studying engineering or something. Yeah, and then she goes on a bike ride through the city and goes and does manual labor, goes through to a garden to pick crops and just does that because she wants to. She doesn't have to. So I don't know, just walking through a normal day and then normalizing all of these things that are like very different in the normal day of a person. Yeah, that's like the idea I had for this story. And then, yeah, the result you can find also on our website. So.
Yeah, and we'll also publish the world's any day now on our Existential Hope website, so it should be available there also.
Yeah, I'm not a great writer yet, but I guess yeah, exactly. And if you have a start, a middle, and a plot twist and an end, then something will come out of it.
Yeah,
because this was a really fun exercise. So yeah, thanks for
it. Yeah, I've tried it myself at some point. It's surprisingly difficult. What you say of not making it feel too alien is always a challenge, I think. So then getting back to the world, like how do you think that this world maybe challenges some of our current understandings of these things that you mentioned in the day in the life story, like what people choose to do with their time, in their leisure time, or how they interact with others socially? Also, what's society's relation to work in this world? That would be interesting to hear.
So in our world, there is some kind of UBI that's formed from the economic profits created by Orare. So yeah, a lot of people have to rethink what do they want to work on. I'm actually really curious about Ken's and Antoine's thought on this as well. We didn't really dive that deep into this one when we were writing it. But we did write about like some people, because prediction markets, there's an AI-assisted part to the prediction market, but then there's also like lots of people predicting. And there's like a financial incentive to be predicting. Some people are able to just quit their normal jobs and focus on predicting. So like they are creating a social good and they are being rewarded for that, and that becomes their work. But of course, then a lot of people, because we have these like very advanced specialized AIs, a lot of people will be able to just live off the UBI and they don't need to work much. So I expect that in 2045, this is still like an open question to a lot of people, like really new field of research, even, or a continuation of happiness research or whatever it's called, where, you know, we keep trying to understand like what makes life meaningful, and we have people try to create their own lives based on that. But then this like idea of civic duty and participating in politics and democracy becomes like crucial. It's not work, it's not leisure, it's like this the third place of activities, like the third kind of activity, and that I think becomes like quite crucial in this future.
Do you want to add anything, Kenza or Antoine?
Yeah, maybe the point that is interesting in my opinion that, in the end, the system, the Orari system, is playing the role of a sort of UBI because it's very prosperous and because it redistributes most of its profit to everyone, but it was not intended to be an UBI. So it's an unexpected consequence of the implementation of the system. And so in our scenario, so there is no AGI, and I don't think that there is any significant replacement of labor force by AI. So because we chose a scenario where the specific problem that is solved by AI is the coordination and forecasting problem, which is not a problem that is very labor intensive today. People are thinking about this, but it's not the major driver of labor. So we imagine that the labor is not that different, but of course everyone is more prosperous and can make choices to be more or less involved in work.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting actually. I think oftentimes the main thing that people think of with AI maybe is like job replacement, displacement, or what's going to happen to the market in that sense. But in terms of the timeline, because that was another thing that was part of this world building journey that you did, was going when you had created this vision with the Orari world to then actually backcast and consider what had to happen in order for this to happen. And so what events did you imagine had to place in order for your world to be able to happen?
Yeah, so about the timeline, as we said before, everything that happened in the timeline, a consequence of the first event, that is just the development of the Orare AI prediction system. So I think we really wanted to play with the fact that the adoption was different in different parts of the world. And so the timeline is very different, for example, in Africa versus the rest of the developing world, and it's different from in the developed world as well. And also what is also important, I think, in our timeline is that the breakthrough is just at the beginning. So it's 2025 at the beginning of the scenario, but then it takes some time to be fully adopted. And I think it makes sense because Orare is great at predicting the future, but before you are trusted, you need to have a very good track record in the long run. So I think it makes sense that, they are good, but people need to really realize that it is good and that they should use the system. So it makes sense that it's not quick to be adapted by everyone. And so what we wanted to talk about in the timeline is first a wide adoption in Kenya. So I think Kenya is a place where it makes sense because, as you probably know, it's a place where the digital economy is very growing more than maybe in the rest of the continent. So Kenya makes sense. And so we thought that maybe a key event would be in 2027. So general election are planned in Kenya. And so we thought that maybe by this date, most of the population would use and trust the system. And so there would be some kind of pressure on the election candidate to say that they will take into account the system. So once again, it's not an authoritarian, not a rule-based governance, but it's just that the candidate say, okay, we trust the system and we are going to use the system as counseling for our decision. And after the campaign, there is a government's act that is passed in Kenya. And basically the act that before voting some new legislation, they have to have some kind of public hearing where everyone can get involved. And so they can get involved using the system. So this is the way that Orari is influencing the governments in Kenya. And so we thought that in a few years, the governance was the most advanced in the world in this country. And then we did some timeline graphs in our documents. So maybe people can look at it, but we thought which country would adopt first and which would not. And so we thought maybe a second batch of Western African countries would join, like a few years later, for example, Ivory Coast. And so this would lead to improvement there as well. And finally, but really late, I think it's in 2040, the developed countries join and really adopt Orare as well. So it's 15 years after the introduction of the system. And if you look at the graph, I think that by the end, you have a GDP per capita that is, I think, above $200,000 in the US, so 3 times what it was at the beginning of the scenario, and more than $100,000 in India and Ivory Coast, so something like 20 times what it was at the beginning of the scenario. So everything is better for those countries in the end.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to maybe dive more into the Orari system now, because we've talked about it obviously a lot, because I think it affects everything pretty much in your world. So do you want to just reiterate, Antoine, how this system works? It's a prediction system, like an AI-powered prediction market, but could you just re-explain it so that people have it top of mind, and then we'll dive into a little bit like how it's been made robust, like in terms of protecting people's privacy and these things.
Yeah, so at the beginning, it's basically just an AI that is getting really good at predicting the future, at predicting the outcome of future decision. But then it becomes not only an AI, but a whole system. And this is due to the fact that the company that first built it wanted it to be profitable for everyone. So what they do, what we imagine they would do, is to create a decentralized organization. In this decentralized organization, everyone an equal treatment. So one human has like one token in the decentralized organization. You cannot buy many tokens and have more influence. It's just one human, one token. So you would need some kind of bio-identification to make sure that the rule abide by that. Let's assume that it's possible. And then the idea that the purpose of the decentralized organization is to make a statement and prediction about the future. And so this statement, they can help the decision-making process at many levels. And it also can be used to be profitable. So how can they do that? They can just fund projects that are going to be successful. They also can get involved in financial market, because if you are allocating resources in the best companies on financial market, you are actually doing something good for the economy. So that's something that we also can do. And in the end, the system is providing insights because everything is public to everyone, but it's also making money. And the idea that this money is redistributed equally to anyone that is involved. And the only condition to get the reward is to be involved in the system, and to be involved, you need to share what you think, what are your preferences. And so the system can use this information to be even more accurate for prediction. So I think that's it. And that's also explain why it would make sense to have really more traction in the developing world, because everyone is earning the same amount at the end of the month. So of course, when you are earning $1,000 a year, you are very incentivized to be involved.
Yeah, and you mentioned that people have to share a lot of data about themselves and their lives. What did you think anything about, like how you made such a system robust, in the sense that how do you actually protect like individuals' privacy in order to make this work more robustly?
Yeah, I think it can be an issue depending on how people are using the system. But the idea that as a decentralized organization, everything has to be anonymous. So of course there is you share your preferences are public, that's true, and no one is supposed to be able to track them down to you. So I think it's quite reasonable to think that it's not likely to really threaten privacy.
Right. It's a topic that's very near and dear to a lot of people in the Foresight community. So it's a good question to ask, I think, when new systems like these are proposed. We touched on work, or like that people are still like free to choose work. And I guess a lot of people would still like work in politics or something like that. Do you think are there any new professions that have emerged in this world that we don't have today? Maybe there isn't.
It's a good question. I'm not sure if there's anything new. I think technology evolves quickly, so there might be like new like workforce on, I don't know, on the biotechnology front or something like that.
Yeah. And do you want to talk a bit more about, because you're the bio nerd, I think, in your group, so talk more about the different bioengineering things going on in this world, and maybe also a bit about like how you govern the new biotechnologies.
Sure. I think a big change we'll see is just more capabilities in the biomanufacturing front, more ownership of the supply chain, as I mentioned before, which means basically countries can make raw materials up until like final vaccines, for example, or where more like certain techniques like phage therapy and things like that become much more well developed because there's a stronger investment in trying to figure out novel biomanufacturing methods. And I think that's now quite a big limitation to coming up with new therapies. And yeah, the reason why that's the case is because people want like easier access to therapies and vaccines and treatments and such. So I think that's one big thing. But the other big thing is also a strong focus on prevention. And that means also because there's an increase in the ability to engineer biology, we are also aware of like the risks of that. And I think probably the best way to offset that is also just to implement better risk management systems. So not necessarily hindering the innovation, but just focusing a lot of the energy on putting in place risk management systems. And that could be, for example, wastewater surveillance. So being able to trace pathogens, whether they're from natural origin or not, on a global scale very quickly, better data sharing mechanisms, and much better cyber security methods within the bio field. So, for example, screening of synthesized DNA and things like that, they just become normal. Whereas now this is like still something we're really pushing for in that field. We're just trying to get to the computer science standard of cybersecurity in the biology field. And so I think in the Orare world, this is all figured out, and we just have reliable systems in place to be able to screen, to be able to do surveillance on pathogens and things like that, and just have more methods in place in order to secure data, but at the same time share it so that we can all benefit from biological data. Yeah, so I think that's a big one. And the other interesting thing is, I think, because a lot of this happens in countries with a lot of natural resources, there will be protocols in place to make sure that those countries remain ownership over these natural resources. And nowadays, that's, for example, done through the Cartagena Protocol, which is set by the United Nations. And I think those things will evolve, like regarding like legislation and things like that. Those things will evolve more such that, natural resources are more protected. But then on the ethics front, for example, for personal medicine, I'm not sure how that will evolve, because it might be that our ethics will evolve. And so maybe in that world, we are more okay with engineering humans, whereas like now that's like gene editing humans is forbidden. So I'm not sure how that will evolve. I think the main thing here is that consumers will have more power in that world. And so consumers will have more say in what they want. And I think now it's quite interesting on like gene editing. You can see the divide between like boomers or Gen Z. Gen Z cares about sustainability. And so they're actually happy to consume GMOs, or they don't necessarily are afraid of that if it helps our world, helps our health and things like that. So I think that might be interesting, is like, how will our ethics change through the generations? Yeah, we'll see. We'll see about that.
Yeah, we'll definitely see. Yeah. One of the constraints that we gave you for this world was that there was not AGI, basically. And the reason for this was like, we didn't want it to be used as a sort of magic wand that solves all the challenges. And yeah, like but I also know that a lot of people think that AGI is very likely and will happen very soon, depending on what definition you have. But we did ask you to provide a reason, like why is there not AGI? So what did you land on in terms of like why this has not been achieved?
Yeah, so I think there are two possible reasons. The first one is something or someone prevented it to happen. And the second possible reason, it was just too hard to get in the timeline. And this is the second one that we chose, mainly because we already had many things to tell in the stories. We didn't want it to have this interaction with the AGI process being a threat, etc. So what we said about this is that basically the scaling hypothesis that the current progress in AI, mostly due to more data and more computational power, whereas a new concept and new infrastructure in the models is not that much responsible for the development of AI. So you have people that think that we are just going to put more resources, more data, and it's going to lead to AGI. And you have people who think that we need a new approach. And so we think that it's possible that we need a new approach. And this is maybe the reason why we didn't find this approach in our timeline. So we didn't get AGI.
Yeah. I'm going to wrap up on the technology questions, but is there any technologies that we haven't touched on yet that you want to mention?
Yeah, there is maybe something we haven't talked a lot in the scenario because we cannot talk about everything. And we wanted to focus on bioengineering, the main example of consequences of the system. But I think it would also have made sense to talk a bit more about energy and climate change mitigation. And I think because the system we designed, we imagined, and Futurity, I think they are really relevant for dealing with issues like climate change mitigation, because you have a lot of trade-off that have to be made between short-term consequences and long-term consequences. You have a lot of distributional issues within different industries, within different people that are more or less vulnerable to climate change. So I think when you have it's so much difficult to make the right decision in those trade-offs. It's really great to have a system that is objective and that is supposed to lead the way to what's the better solution for humanity. Yeah, I think we could have said more about this, but I think we talked about the technological aspect of it. So maybe it helped, for example, to finance the most promising project, for example, in solar energy. So that solar energy, the costs have been really dropping in the last 10 years, and it should drop at the same pace in the coming 10 years. It's going to be basically to solve the energy problems. Yeah, it was not the key of the scenario for the reason I explained, but it's also interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We had Jason Crawford from Route to Progress also talking. He said he had 3 things that we thought was like the pillars of the future, and that was like more energy and pro-growth solutions for climate challenges, I think, and then more people as well. But yeah, energy is a big one when we think about the future.
Yeah,
Here you go.
Yeah, no, just I want to say that what's nice with this kind of system is that, yes, if you find some pro-growth solution of climate change, yeah, that's great. And if the system can help identifying and financing them, it's really great. But if you can't, maybe the technology is too hard, we don't know yet. You can also use it as a way to share the burden of the short-term costs that you will have to support to have better long-term outcomes. So,
yeah, great. Said. So we've talked a lot about the technology now, but also if we go back more to the people of this world, what meaning-making practices do people have, or like how do people find meaning in their lives? Is it similar to today, or has anything changed?
I think of this in terms of like people feel meaningless when they feel powerless, or that's one of the contributors at least with Orare and with direct democracy and with this subsidiarity that's built into the system where you have quite a lot of control on things that are immediately influencing you. I would like to think that helps a lot in that we have this our images of the future is, if there's UBI, if there's no work, then people will like lose their sense of meaning, or as if work gives you meaning. But yeah, I think that civic duty and this like experience of I can influence the world And through the system, I can influence a lot of different kinds of decisions that are happening all around me. I can really push the world towards a shape that I want it to be. I feel like that's already going to give a lot of people a sense of meaning. But then I also expect, for example, art to really flourish in this world and that to become like a deeper part of a lot of people's lives. And probably also like through the system of, or like with this experience of like influence where you have more power, I would like to think that that also gives people like more incentive or like a feeling of that educating yourself and just like understanding the world better becomes more meaningful as well. But yeah, I'm also curious about my teammates' thoughts on this. I think it's a great question.
You guys want to add anything?
I think more like community effort will become more meaningful, right? So community activities will give a lot of value. And part of that will be through the Orari system, but part of that will also just be like more collaborative living or actively building things together. Yeah. So I think these like common projects will become more meaningful for people.
Yeah. I agree. I think usually I'm not too worried about this question, actually. I think people will probably be able to find things and agree on the sort of empowerment point as long as they are empowered. Was there anything that inspired you when you created this world? It could be anything like books or movies or anything in the real world that inspired you in creating this world.
I could speak for myself. This is like why I was pushing on the bio like angle here. I'm right now actually at a synthetic biology conference, so I'm always inspired by these more like consumer products that people are trying to push out of this field, which is very difficult, and not a lot of people are trying that because I don't know, it's not, we can do so many more powerful things with this, so why would I make a glowing plant? But then in the last 3 months, a lot of these like synbio consumer products have actually gone to the market, and I think it changes a lot. So we have glowing plants, air purifying plants. What else was there? Like purple tomatoes that have been engineered for better nutrients, things like that, that have gone like on the market these like past 3 months. And I find that very empowering because now people have this in their hands. Like people can interact with it. And I think that's so much more valuable than this very inaccessible field of biotechnology that's just like behind in a lab and people don't really know what happens there, which I think was an issue with vaccines rollout and things like that. So I'm always passionate about that, and which is why I like the DIY bio community and such. So that's something that inspired me to try and imagine a world where people can interact more with these technologies and are accepting of them, and also are more able to build these risk management systems and things like that, because they're more aware of the risks as well. Yeah, that's like my inspiration.
Yeah. Is there anything in the ideas that you presented that you think could actually influence real world policy or real world technology in the near term?
Yes, so I think the question is real on point, because actually we've been in contact with people that heard, thanks to the world building competition, that heard of our work and that asked exactly the same question. So we thought about it. I really, thanks to this project, I really thought a lot about futarchy. I had vaguely heard of it before, but I really tried to understand more in which situation it could work or could not work. I think the original proposal back in 2005 was in a context where it was probably difficult to actually implement. But I think the emergence of new AIs that can do good forecasts can really be game-changing for this idea of futarchy. And what I think is important is that you don't need to have something as good as Orare scenario to be useful. Even if you just have AI that can be decent forecaster, you can have some system, prediction market-based system where multiple AIs can compete and that can influence policies in the right direction. So I think it would be great if more people would think about this. So maybe what we could do is try to I think it would be interesting to try to promote this Futarchian principle for example, to policymakers or policy influence, because basically most of them have never heard of this. Of course, all the technical aspect of it, so having AI doing the job is also important to influence the real world application. And another also way to have influence on real world is to try to drag the existing prediction market towards more policy-related questions. Today, prediction markets are usually focused on the areas that interest the users, so a lot of tech, a lot of AI, geopolitics, politics. But policy outcome, it's not very common, and it's also a bit difficult to set up because you need to have different markets with different possible outcomes for policies. But I think it would be great to try to influence the existing prediction market to do a bit more on policy forecasts.
Yeah, I hope to see some of this in the real world. And yeah, I would be interested to see, hope maybe some of you guys will be working on it. That would be great. I know we're at the hour. Do you have 2 more minutes just to wrap up? Yeah, great. So I would like to just hear also if you thought about how this world would evolve beyond 2045. Is there any new challenges that you would see looming on the horizon for this world?
So I see that there is potential that with this direct democracy system, people will start questioning the status quo, which is the representative democracy. I think people will probably start wondering what is the point of voting for representatives in the government and then having this whole media circus and this tribalism when we could just as well do like all of the decision making or the vast majority of the decision making directly through them. And in my head, there's also maybe a deliberation system that's built into this, facilitating not just like voting and making the decisions and expressing preferences, but also people communicating with each other to find common consensus. So inspired by systems like Polis, for example, which help deliberation systems. Yeah, I'm also I'm not the biggest fan of representative democracy. Maybe you can tell. That's something that I envision. But it is a challenge, right? Because that's a pretty big change, and probably will cause turbulence.
Yeah, I feel I've seen some very interesting proposals of deliberation coordinators coming from new possibilities with AI for this type of tool. If you had to choose one message or idea that you really hope that listeners will take away from this world, what would you choose?
Okay, I'm not sure if I have anything smart to say here, but I guess in the capitalistic world we live in, consumers have power. And I think in the Orari world, it's emphasized of, okay, we can actually make decisions, etc. But you can do that today by deciding on what you want as a person to have your life look like. So I guess maybe that's my takeaway. I don't know if Antoine or Sophie has anything to say, but I think you, as a consumer, already have that power. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sophie.
I would say my takeaway would be that we can be more ambitious around democracy. We can try to push it and have it evolve and have it be more representative of the future that we actually want.
Yeah. I think my main takeaway, if I get to share also, is the potential of forecasting. Yeah, it's really interesting to see in practice what you could do if you improve on this basically as a society. So last question, how did you find this doing world building? Is there anything you're taking away from this practice? Would you want to ever do world building again?
I've personally found it really fun to work with people from very different disciplines and then just trying to put something together. And I think if I do world building again, this was, I learned a lot from this experience just from Antoine and Sophie. So I would definitely, if I would do it again, meet with other people from different disciplines and put something together. Yeah, I was also surprised by just starting from a future hope scenario that I would like to believe in, and then working back, how can we actually achieve that? It was a very useful exercise to try.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I completely agree. Kansas, a really positive experience, and really enjoyed working with people from different backgrounds and with different visions. So that was really interesting for me. And for me, doing foresight instead of forecast was also really interesting to change my way of thinking about the future. Yeah, I think I would really like to do world building again. And if I were to do this again in the Orare framework, I think it would be interesting for us to think a bit more about actual feasibility of the scenario, because so it was an existential hope project with that's to work in the end. But you can also think a bit more about which are the challenging there and which are the features and design that can work or not work in certain situations. So I think, plenty of things to do even in this scenario.
I found this whole experience super lovely. I think it was amazing. Our team was great. I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot. And it was really lovely to also have this opportunity to dip my toes into the water of this kind of creative work, which I was a bit intimidated by initially, but then I don't know. Now I'm very excited about it, and I want to engage with this more and more. And I really enjoyed during the course. We heard these great lectures by a lot of really interesting guests, and there were like super interesting reading lists. And it's just so interesting how many different kinds of fields of studies come into this process. And it's just, I feel like I found like a new branch in personal skill tree that I get to now kind of invest a lot of time into, because it's just so exciting for me.
That's very, very nice to hear. Yeah, I think your team really was like a really good mix of different expertises as well. And that's Robert Lempert, who was one of the lecturers, I think always tries to say that when doing world building, that's what you want, because it tends to be a more robust world also that you get if you're not all in the same echo chamber or all coming from the same perspective. So I think, yeah, you guys really succeeded in creating like a robust, and that's like very desirable for, I think, most people. So yeah, great job. And thank you so much for participating, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And yeah, I hope to see a lot of you in the future. So thank you so much.